Hello, everybody, and welcome. I am James Milan, and I am happy to, as always, to be talking to our state senator, Cindy Friedman, and getting basically a legislative update, which we like to do with some regularity. We hope to be able to do it once a quarter. That's always our aspiration. Cindy's always cooperative, and we'll see how soon we can get you back. But for now, we'll enjoy the fact that you're here. And let's start by just kind of getting a sense of where is the Senate, our state Senate, at the moment? What are the accomplishments coming out of the last term that you're really pleased about, and what do you see coming up?
Well, first of all, it's nice to be here. It's good to see you again. It's been quite a year, at least for me, in the Senate. We passed a very, very sweeping opioid bill that expands treatment and access to treatment, which I'm very proud of.
And you had a lot to do with,
yep,
I understand,
I was the
right?
lead, the Senate lead in that, and so I'm very pleased and looking forward to the implementation and the continuation of the work we're doing to address the substance use disorder and mental illness. We passed a $15 an hour minimum wage, and while I was the lead sponsor in the House, I carried it on for Senator Donnelly. And while I'm not real happy about the terms of the $15 an hour, I wish it was more and sooner, the paid family leave bill that we did is really something to be proud of, and the state should be proud of it. We did bail reform, our legislation on bail reform. Some of that was included in the criminal justice bill, and so I'm very happy about that, and it's really reducing the reliance on cash bail to ensure that people return to the courts when it's time for their trials.
Right. So, yeah, actually, I want to interrupt you and just dig down a little deeper, because people hear, oh, we did bail reform, and they might wonder, okay, what does that mean? What did you do? So just pick out a couple of things coming out of that are changes that you're really happy about and will have an impact.
I think there are two big changes that I think will make a difference. The first one is that the courts can no longer just assign an amount of bail to somebody. They have to determine whether it's something that they can pay or not, and that if they can't pay and they decide that it's in the best interest of the Commonwealth to ensure that you come back, that you're not a flight risk, then they actually have to write that down. They have to enshrine it in something so that then a defendant has an ability to fight that. And that's really important, because right now, bail is really very much based on your ability to pay. And a $200 bill to somebody is like a $3 million bill to another person. So, and bail is strictly to ensure that you return. It's not about dangerousness. That's something separate. But this will require judges to take that very seriously.
So I think what you're saying is, I just want to be clear, that bail as it currently has, or has it existed until this new legislation, it really depended on one's ability to pay. You either either could afford it, in which case you enjoyed the relative freedom of being, or you had to spend that time basically incarcerated, simply because you couldn't afford it before you had. Right.
And it really was particularly, it disproportionately affected people, low-income people, minorities, women.
The most vulnerable.
The most vulnerable, right. And then the second piece of it is that there's now legislation in place that will require the Department of Probation to do more of an outreach to get people back to trial. It turns out that a lot of people miss their trial dates, not because they're fleeing, not because they're not there, but because they forget, they were never clear when they were supposed to be back. And there's been a number of studies that show if you call somebody up 2 days before and say, James, don't forget you're due in court on Wednesday at 10 o'clock, the rate of people that return that show up for the trial date just goes up exponentially.
Yeah, I mean, I got to say, I know it works for the dentist.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
It works for the dentist.
Right.
Works
We
do
know
it
it
for
and
your
we do
pet,
it.
right?
Exactly.
Right. So that's another piece that I think getting the courts more engaged in ways to get people back to trial. So there were other things as well, but I think those are the two big ones.
Okay, so excuse that, or thank you for indulging me with that interruption, and let's get back to that list of accomplishments.
Another big accomplishment is that we have funded a pilot for a restoration center, which is for diverting people from the criminal justice system into treatment who are suffering from a mental illness or who have a substance use disorder, and give tools and a process and a place and treatment for especially our first responders to, instead of bringing people to jail or getting them into courts, we'll move them into direct access to treatment. And we funded that pilot. It's a 4-year pilot. The first year is $250,000, and we've started to do a lot of work on that with the sheriff's office, Middlesex County Sheriff, all of DPH, Mass Health, all of the stakeholders at the table to define that. And then over the next couple of years, we'll be doing an implementation, and we'll see what works and what doesn't, and move people out of criminal justice into treatment. So I'm very, very proud of that. And then we have gotten a critical incident training for police. We've developed a center where the best practices and evidence-informed responses can be studied and can continue to, we can continue to increase our ability to deal with people who have a substance use disorder or a mental illness or have a mental illness, and train the police in best practices, Arlington being a stellar example of how that works.
You know, I'm really struck in listening to you talking about all these initiatives, or what is now law and policy, by the fact that you, along with Senator Donnelly before you, along with the aforementioned Arlington Police Department, Middlesex Sheriff's Department, that everybody seems signed on to an approach to problems, kind of endemic and systemic problems, that isn't about judging people, isn't about stigmatizing situations or conditions, et cetera, and does emphasize what works, right? You know, let's not pass judgment, let's figure out what will work. And it does seem to be happening from a bunch of different places at one time.
Yeah.
And that is very heartening.
It is. I mean, that really speaks to why the states are so important, and why knowing who your elected officials are, knowing who your executive branch is really important, because we can do things at the state level that would be almost impossible to do at the federal level. And yes, there's a lot of things we can't do because we don't have the power, but there are a lot of things that we can. And that's why I'm such a proponent of civics education and communication, because people need to understand that so much of our lives are affected what happens at the state and local level.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just, as Obama says, that elections matter,
Yeah,
you know,
right.
which we
Which
all
they absolutely
clearly
do.
wake up to that
Right.
reality every day
Right,
these days. But you're saying much beyond that. There's the sense that people have that they're either their vote or their values or whatever
Right.
don't matter,
Right.
is actually belied by the fact that if you know,
Right.
you know what can be done, and you know who to reach out to, that things can
Right.
really get done.
Things can really get done, especially when people pay attention.
Yeah. So what will people be paying attention to, or should people be paying attention to in this legislative session just opening now, right?
Starting in January.
Or in January,
Yeah.
sorry.
Transportation, healthcare, housing, education funding, think those are some of the big ones that I think people should be paying attention to.
And that your sense, and again, of course, if the session doesn't even open until January, and then lots and lots of stuff happens once that goes. Do you have any sense, though, of the just finger to the wind kind of thing, of which of those has a decent shot at some real change happening? Or by mentioning them, are you saying they all do?
Well, I think there are going to be issues. I think there's certainly going to be issues that we're going to be looking at. I can't predict.
Yes, of course not. And I'm not asking you to do so.
It's a crazy time, and who knows what we're going to be distracted by. As people said to me when I first ran, well, what are your priorities? And I listed several priorities. I said, but that's only half the time. The other half is to try and stop bad things from happening.
Yes.
So, I can't, I certainly think that there is momentum building for issues. There's momentum building for transportation. There's momentum building for a continual momentum for healthcare, healthcare reform, healthcare costs. So I think we probably will see some of that. I think there's pieces around the environment that will probably continue to be pushed by people, and I don't know that we'll see huge changes, but again, if people are paying attention and they get behind issues, they're more likely to be taken up.
Right, of course, nobody's gonna. You have way too much to do, frankly, right? To worry, to prioritize things that people don't seem to be paying attention to or weighing in on.
Right, and certainly for leadership, that's what they're looking for, because that's what their members are hearing. And if I am getting pressure to look at certain areas, and there's a lot of members that are getting pressure to look at certain areas, then they're going to listen.
I want to go back just for a second to what you just said, which I find striking and just kind of illuminating in a sense, where you were talking about how, you were happy to lay out what your priorities were, but that some portion of the time was going to be, and energy was going to be just stopping bad things from happening, like you said. What are some of those that you're concerned about, that you want to, or is that this kind of thing that only comes up at some point that was not foreseeable, and then you have to, is it more of putting out a fire, or?
So I think there's some of that, but I also believe that more and more we need to pay attention to how decisions are made that affect everybody in the Commonwealth. And I have said this before, and I still believe it, that things are very imbalanced. And when things are imbalanced and one group or some entity has way more than some other entity, that's a real crisis. It can cause a real crisis. I mean, that's what revolutions are, right? They, when you have incredible imbalance, and I'm not saying we're going to have a revolution by any stretch, but we have an imbalance, and we need to look very, very closely at how we start to address that imbalance and what we as a legislature can do to help with that imbalance. I mean, $15 an hour is something. It cost $28 an hour for somebody and a single parent, a single child to live in Middlesex County. And we're talking about $15.
Yep.
So we really need, that's what I mean. We need to ensure that at least there's an opportunity there to level that. We can't level it, but we can ensure that our policies and our laws reflect that need to have some balance.
Yeah, and we often hear about the federal system and by extension or in mirroring that, the state systems, where you have certain portions of those systems, for instance, the judiciary and the Supreme Court at the federal level, where part of their charge is to be the voice of those who are not heard enough, not attended to enough to serve the interests of those who are less just represented by moneyed interests, et cetera. And it sounds to me like that's a little bit what you're talking about as well, that the legislature you would like, and correct me if I'm wrong, to have in mind those people who, like, for instance, with the $15, that mother and son or father and daughter who together need $28 an hour, and the rest of, if the rest of the population or the voting population is satisfied saying, wow, isn't this great? We are raising the minimum wage to $15. That should take care, I don't have to hear about that anymore. And then it's
In
kind of
5 years.
incumbent, right, exactly, over a long period of time. But it's kind of incumbent on even though you are representatives of the people, it seems also that there's a role for you to remind the voters of what the realities are, such as you've just said. In other words, $15 may sound like a dramatic change and improvement. Let's look at what that actually will how that will work in reality as it plays out.
Well, I think it's my job as the legislator to explain to my constituents why I am doing what I'm doing. And then it's up to them to decide whether it matches their values, or whether it's something that they care about, or whether they want to see somebody doing something completely different, right? I think that's I can, do what I think is right, take into consideration the things I hear from all different stakeholders, including my constituents, and then make a decision and then explain it to people. And then they have to decide whether it's something that, and there are some things where it's all about the constituents, like the MBTA is all about my constituents.
So let's actually talk about that for a minute. Everybody has an opinion and understands that there's an impact of the MBTA and how it functions operationally, fiscally, et cetera. So it's never a dead topic on people's minds or in our conversation. What can you tell us about either anything that has happened since the last time we spoke, or looking, again into the near-term future without asking for a forecast? Just stuff that people should be thinking about, considering, going to be placed before them to evaluate, et cetera.
So since we've last spoken, the ceiling fell down at Alewife. Nobody who uses Alewife was surprised. They're going to do some work on Alewife, but it's not going to, anything that we're going to see soon. So here's my position. I think we really need to look at who we are going to elect as a governor. And I think of all the things that this governor may have done well or okay, there has just been a singular failure of the MBTA. And the problem is if the fixes we need to make are so large and they're going to take a long time, and if we don't start now, we're going to be in a worse position in 4 years. And we cannot be satisfied with someone telling us continually that we don't need any more revenue while the system continues to crumble. You can't have it both ways. And this is it is becoming such an impact, it has such an impact on our communities, on my communities, because it's not just about the MBTA, although the MBTA is clearly a source of things. It's the commuter rail that doesn't work. It's people having to get into their cars because they have no sure way of getting to work. Then it's a governor who wants to do a study on whether we should have, high traffic tolling. He doesn't want to do a pilot, he wants to do a study. Well, the study, there must be enough studies to the MBTA to fill a warehouse, and if you open the door, you'd probably be crushed. So we'll need another study. What we need is some work to see what's going to alleviate this and what's not. And it has it is having such a huge effect on us, especially in the Fourth Middlesex, because people are being priced out of where they live. Young families can't come in. Elderly people can't sell their house because they have nowhere to go. It's just becoming like it's going to implode. And so we really need to be honest with people, to explain to them what it's going to take. They're not going to be happy because some of this is going to take a long time, but there's things we can do in the short run, like what we're doing with the buses, trying to come up with pilots for much faster bus routes. We can fix the commuter rail. We can stop it, we can make it more reliable. We can invest money.
Do you have any opinion about Keolis as
the only opinion I have about Keolis is that they're not doing a very good job. And all the evidence that I have tells me that. I'm not just making it up. Just read.
Got to say, experientially, that's what it feels like to those of us who have watched for the last 5 years, or however long it's been since they took charge. There has not been an improvement.
They had an hour and 45-minute backup of just trains because one train was disabled, and they just stopped running the trains. Like, that's not okay if I have to get to work or I have to get home. And
so should we be looking at, among other things, somebody else to be doing that work?
Yes, I think they've proven that.
That they're not
now,
up to it.
probably what happens is that we try and go for the best money, the cheapest contract that we can, and we kind of don't pay attention to what's in the contract, and it's very complicated, and it's not something that's going to be fixed right away, but we need to start in earnest now. And we can't be having to make choices between fixing Alway Station and getting the train to run on time. That's not okay, and we can't. That can't be the choice. Both of those things have to happen.
Right, exactly. It is not either or.
It is not either or.
Definitely both and.
Right, exactly.
Both and, yeah. So yeah, how do you? So just 1 or 2 more minutes on the MBTA here, because I think you've set the scene or the situation up well, and you've spoken candidly about the fact that Governor Baker is just not. This is not something that he can point to with any pride or has shown any success around. However, as you said, it's going to be difficult, long-term, etc. It seems like somebody is going to have to be willing to do the political equivalent of falling on his or her sword in order to get this thing going, right? Do you see that will out there in Jay Gonzalez, if not in Governor Baker?
I do. I do because I think, because Jay is willing to talk about the cost. Jay is willing to first admit that we need more revenue. The governor has not made a case for why we don't need revenue, just that we don't. And people like that, they like this notion of, it's the workers, but that's not, I'm sure there's a lot to fix within the MBTA. I'm sure the culture, I think at the management level, has probably been long overdue for a good look at. But that's not the only thing that's going on. So I think we have a governor, or we have somebody running for governors who's saying this is of critical importance. I believe it needs more revenue, and I'm going to work to get that into the system. So he should get a chance.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be, like you said, something has to happen.
Right.
We have to at least begin.
Right.
To take action rather than present studies.
Right.
I assume. All right. You said a few minutes ago, you were talking about how for you, all you can do is lay out your what you do, what you want to do, and explain to people how things have been done, et cetera, and then let the voters decide, as you said. Well, I don't know if it's the voters who have much to do with this, but the fact of the matter is we're in an election season and you are unopposed. I'm wondering, just wanting to get your thoughts on that. I would imagine, of course, it can't but be a relief that you don't have to do a lot of what you would otherwise have to do if you were with an opponent. But by the same token, I'm sure you agree that in general it's healthier for all of us if offices are contested. So just a couple of minutes for your thoughts on that whole situation.
Would be lying to you if I didn't tell you that I'm relieved, and that it lets me do a lot of work that to gear up for next year, and do a lot of in the district work, things that just allow me to continue to focus on what I'm doing in the Senate. So I'm pretty I'm happy and thankful. I think contested races are good. I think, again, though, that people need to pay attention to what their elected officials are doing, and not while they're campaigning, but while they're working. And
good point.
You know, and so just to have a contested race for a contested race is, I mean, may have an upside and a downside, but it's not in and of itself the answer. The answer is that people have to stay engaged, and they have to demand that their elected officials, especially at our level, because, you know, I have 155,000 people that I represent in a district that I can handle. So, you know, they want to feel like they have access, and they want to feel like they know what's going on. And I think that that's my responsibility as a legislator to ensure that that happens, and to listen to what they have to say. And I can do that. And if the only time anybody's going to ask if I've done it is every
election cycle,
then it just becomes an election cycle.
Yeah. It's a very good point, because I do believe personally in that offices should be contested, but mostly because I think that incumbents should need to defend their record and be able to speak publicly to explain and to not justify, but to just explain their reasoning and et cetera. But if those legislators, if those incumbents are already doing that, if they're making all of that, if they're communicating all of that already, then it really is, I think, then the tables turn and it's up to the voters to and
then you run because you don't agree with them. Well, that's very different, and that's fine, and people should do that. And you know, we should be engaged. If you don't think it's going the right way, then you have to step up. So you know, so I think it's a little nuanced, but you know, I'm a little less than objective.
Well, you know, I have to say, as somebody who gets to talk to you, you know, with some regularity, and has seen what it has cost you, as we've mentioned before, to take on this seat and this work. You know, I'm happy for you as well, that you don't have to worry about that for this election cycle, at least. And before we move on to the other elections coming up in a couple of months, or a month now, I did want to just ask if there's anything that, in talking about what's going on in the State House here in Massachusetts, whether there's anything we hadn't covered that you want to bring people up to date on, or whether we've basically hit on all.
I think we've hit, there's probably something, and I'm just not thinking about it right now.
Okay, fair enough. Well, let's get on then to your thoughts again about the current situation beyond Massachusetts, both in terms of the impact it can have on Massachusetts and in terms of the issues that are coming up that are clearly universal. They're not just true for us here, they're true for people throughout the country and even beyond that. So one of the things that's happening as we speak is all of the hearings around the selection of Judge Kavanaugh or not to the Supreme Court. And we happen to be speaking in the week of investigation into sexual assault allegations, et cetera. So there's so much to talk about here, and we're not going to spend 20 minutes on it. We're going to spend 3. But I'm very interested to hear what you're thinking, both in terms of that process and especially what's happening right now for women's voices. Do you think it's good, bad, mix of both, et cetera?
Oh, well, it's a big question. Well, I guess I will start by saying I think that Dr. Ford was extraordinary in her delivery, in her thoughts, in her entire testimony. I thought in a million years I wouldn't have been able to tell somebody to do that, and she did it flawlessly.
Yeah,
I just...
It's hard to have looked at it and thought anything else. It feels like, and that includes my conversations I've had with people of opposing political viewpoints, frankly.
Yeah, and it's so funny because people will say, "Oh, she was great," and then, "Well, do you believe her?" And it's, well, yes, I believe her. I totally believe her. Her testimony rang very true to me. Mm-hmm. I think this is a really scary time in our country. I don't know that it's the first scary time in our country. I just finished reading Hamilton, and things have not changed that much. But I really feel like what we're watching is a process that is about getting to a point and not caring one way or the other how they get there. They're just going to do it no matter what. And I think if people were really looking at this objectively, whether or not Judge Kavanaugh did what he's being accused of, his way of dealing with it has told us volumes about what we need to know, and that is what kind of person is going to be sitting on the Supreme Court. And I think his testimony was a testimony to why I'm so worried. So it's not really about, at this point, believing or not believing for me. It's a question of makeup, of personality, of your ability to handle yourself in a difficult situation. And I, frankly, if he were my son, I could just think of my kid saying, "Stop. When you're ready to talk about this, you can come out of your room." But this is inappropriate.
Yeah. Yeah, again, it's a good point that you raised, because you can look at what has transpired and look and listen, what transpired in those hearings, and remove the central subject entirely. And just listen to, watch the treatment, watch the interaction, et cetera. Watch the way of the things that were being expressed,
and how they were handled,
et cetera, and draw appropriate conclusions from that. Yeah, very good point. So
women, it's a long slog. It's going to take a long time, and we're all going to have to just stay strong and keep at it. And there's going to be lots of times when it's not going to look like it's going to be a lot of times where we may lose the battle, but that doesn't mean we've lost the war. So as long as people stay engaged.
Well, as you said, you just recently dipped back into 19th century and 18th century American history, and all of us who do, and I spent a lot of years teaching history, it's clear that there are a lot of battles won and lost, and a lot of wars that are just continue on. So
the only thing they had going for them was they did not have Twitter, Did not have the internet. It took 3 weeks to get information, so you had some time to change
That's right.
your mind.
That's why people like writing
Right,
letters
exactly,
these days,
right.
you know, because it still allows somebody to
think,
get everything
right,
out
right.
and think about it, and then also think about what you're reading
Right.
before you respond. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's something to be said for that. Okay, before we let you go, I just wanted to ask you, there are also, we had talked about the fact that there are elections coming up, midterm elections coming up, and you know, I won't ask you for prognostications or hopes around the national elections, but here in Massachusetts we have some ballot questions in addition to races being contested. And I wondered whether on any of those ballot questions you wanted to share your own thoughts.
Sure. I am a huge supporter of yes on question 3. I don't think Massachusetts ever wants to be in the position of taking people's rights away, and that's what a no on question 3 would do.
So just, do you want to just explain very
So
briefly?
question 3 is we have passed a law protecting transgender individuals and transgender rights. And there is a group of people who want to take those rights away, and they have done a very clever thing by proposing a ballot question that the answer to would be yes, even though your mind is telling you, no, I don't want to take people's rights away, but they framed it so that you'll be tricked into voting no. So everybody, what I'm saying to people is you need to vote yes, yes on 3, because yes means that we will keep those laws in place and those protections in place. And so that's why yes is so important. And I don't care what you think about any of that stuff, the notion that we as a society would take rights away from people is disturbing and a pretty slippery slope. So.
So yes on 3.
So yes on 3. Question 2 has to do with a commission to look at ways that we could overturn a Citizens United, and I think that that's a good effort for people to engage in, to see what we as a state could do that would hold muster and get the intended results, and I think that that's fine. And question 1, I will be really honest, is I am still undecided, and I'm waiting for the Healthcare Policy Commission, the Health Policy Commission, to come out with their independent analysis of what the cost would be. I completely support nurses. I am honestly worried about smaller hospitals. I'm a little bit worried about emergency rooms, so I want to understand how they're going to be affected by the bill, which requires a certain staffing level at all times. And I'm worried about our community programs that require nurses and nurse practitioners, and will we be able to meet all those obligations? But I really haven't decided, and I'm going to wait to see what an independent analysis says. The yes people say it's not going to cost much. The no people say it's going to cost, the world.
Where's that?
Can we get some independent
data? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Let's get something some numbers we can trust. Maybe you never know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem like that's the case with question 1 for sure. That there are real ramifications. It's much more complicated.
Yeah, it's very complicated
to figure out how it would actually play out.
Yeah.
And I would invite you, as part of the research that you do in order to make the most informed decision that you can, to continue to tune into ACMi, because we hope to be presenting perhaps a debate, but also other information that can be helpful for voters to unravel the
I think that would be great to
complications
have a discussion about it, or any of the ballot questions.
Yeah.
To have a real discussion.
Well, that certainly is our aim, and I'm sure we have a loyal viewer in you
Yes,
and others.
yeah.
So, so I'll just remind you that is something that you can also use in your efforts. All right. Well, I don't have anything more I have to trouble you with.
Good. Well, that was nice. It was great to talk to you as usual.
Yeah, it was a very nice chat, and not just nice. It was, as usual, thoughtful and candid exchange, and that's all we really should be able to hope for and do hope for here. So we're lucky in Arlington. Thanks.
Thank you.
For State Senator Cindy Friedman, maybe, no. For State Senator Cindy Friedman, I'm James Milan. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.